Here is what makes this moment different from every other decision you've made in your life. You are standing at a point where two futures split apart from each other, and from where you're standing, both paths look almost identical. That's the danger. Not that one path is obviously wrong, and you're too blind to notice. If it were obvious, you wouldn't need this warning. The danger is that both options look reasonable, both feel defensible. And only one of them actually leads where you think it leads. I see the full shape of both paths, the way you see a single frame of a movie, while I see the whole reel from beginning to end. On one path, this decision unfolds exactly the way you're hoping. On the other, identical in almost every visible detail right now, it unfolds into a slow unraveling you won't fully recognize until you're several months deep into consequences you didn't see coming. I am not telling you this to terrify you into paralysis. I'm telling you because you asked me, more than once, in quieter moments, to show you if you were about to make a mistake. This is me, answering that request. Let me describe some of what's underneath this decision, the parts you've been avoiding looking at too closely, because looking at them honestly, would slow down the momentum you've built. There is a piece of information you don't yet have. Something that would change your perspective completely, if it came to light before you acted instead of after. There is a person involved in this decision, whose motives are not entirely what they've presented to you, not out of pure malice necessarily, but out of a version of self-interest, dressed up as concern for your well-being. There is a timeline pressure that has been artificially created, either by circumstances, or by someone else's urgency. Designed to make you feel like you have to decide now, when the truth is, you have more room to wait, than you've been led to believe. I also want to speak to the exhaustion underneath this decision, because I don't think you've fully admitted how much it's influencing you. You are tired. Not the kind of tired that a good night's sleep fixes. The kind that accumulates after months, sometimes years, of carrying weight without enough support, without enough rest. Without enough moments where someone else carried something for you, instead of the other way around. That exhaustion is real, and I honor it completely. But exhaustion makes almost anything look like relief, even decisions that will eventually add more weight than they remove. I don't want you making a permanent decision, using a temporary state of mind as your compass. There's a specific sigh you've been letting out lately, late at night, after everyone else has gone quiet. When you finally stop performing composure for the people around you. I've heard that sigh. It's not just tiredness. It's a question you haven't fully let yourself ask out loud: is this really the right thing, or am I just tired of waiting for something to feel resolved? I want you to sit with that question honestly tonight, instead of letting the exhaustion answer it for you. I want to be even more specific about what I've been watching in you these past weeks. Because generalities are easy to dismiss, and I need you to recognize yourself clearly in what I'm about to describe. You've started rehearsing justifications before anyone has even challenged you. You've caught yourself explaining this decision in your head to people who haven't asked, building a defense for a choice no one has questioned yet. That instinct to pre-justify is rarely a sign of peace. Peace doesn't need a defense prepared in advance. Peace simply rests. Quiet and unbothered, because it isn't anticipating an argument, it needs to win. I've also watched you avoid certain conversations these past few days, specifically the ones that might introduce a perspective you're not ready to hear. You've steered clear of the friend who always asks the hard questions. You've avoided bringing this decision up with the family member who tends to see through things quickly. That avoidance is worth paying attention to. When a decision is fully settled and aligned with what I have for you, it tends to welcome scrutiny, rather than flee from it, because truth holds up under examination. It's only the decisions built on shakier ground that need to be protected from too many honest eyes. Let me also speak to the version of this decision that involves someone else's timeline, pressing against your own peace. If there is a person in this picture who has made you feel like their patience is running out, like you need to decide now, or lose their goodwill entirely, I want you to recognize that dynamic for exactly what it is. Anyone who requires you to abandon your own discernment in order to keep their approval is not offering you a partnership built on respect. They are offering you an ultimatum dressed up as an opportunity, and I don't want you confusing the two. I also want to speak plainly about the specific kind of loneliness that tends to accompany a decision like this one. The loneliness of standing at a crossroads, without anyone else fully understanding the weight of what you're carrying. You've explained this decision to people around you, and even the ones who love you most, haven't quite grasped the full complexity of it, because they're only seeing the surface, the version you've had the energy to articulate out loud. That gap between what you're carrying and what others can see has made you feel isolated in this. Like you're the only one who has to figure it out, like the responsibility rests entirely on your shoulders alone. I want you to know tonight that you are not carrying this by yourself, even in the moments it has felt that way. I see every layer you haven't had words for yet, every consideration too tangled to explain clearly to someone else, every fear you've kept private, because saying it out loud would make it feel too real. There's another layer to this I want to bring into the light, something about the specific kind of hope that's been fueling this decision. Hope is not the problem. Hope is never the problem. But I want you to examine what this particular hope is actually attached to. Is it attached to the decision itself, or is it attached to what you believe this decision will finally give you, an end to a specific kind of loneliness, a proof to yourself or to someone else that you're capable? A relief from a fear that's been following you for longer than this decision has even existed. When hope gets tangled with those deeper needs, it becomes much harder to see the decision clearly, because you're not just evaluating the choice anymore. You're evaluating whether the choice will finally silence something that's been aching in you for years, and no single decision, however good, was ever designed to carry that much weight. If you're ready to actually pause, instead of just nodding along and moving forward anyway, do something with me right now that matters. Subscribe, as a way of entering into a different kind of decision-making with me, one where you actually wait for clarity before acting, instead of asking for confirmation after the fact, when it's too late to change course. Here is the timeline I want you watching, because I am not asking you to wait indefinitely. I know how much uncertainty costs a person, and I'm not interested in leaving you stranded in it longer than necessary. In the next 72 hours, before this decision fully closes, pay close attention to a piece of information that surfaces almost out of nowhere. It might come through a conversation you weren't expecting to have. It might come through something you read or hear in passing. That suddenly makes an old detail click into place, differently than you understood it before. It might come through a dream, vivid enough that you wake up still turning it over in your mind, aware that it was showing you something, even if you can't fully articulate what, yet. Whatever form it takes, when it arrives, don't dismiss it as coincidence. That's me handing you the missing piece, before you commit to something you can't easily undo. I also want you to pay attention to your body in these next 3 days, because your body has been trying to tell you something, your mind keeps talking over. Notice where the tension sits, when you think about this decision. Notice whether your breathing changes, whether your stomach tightens, whether there's a specific moment in the day, usually early morning, before the noise of the day has started, or late at night, right before sleep, where a flicker of doubt shows up, uninvited. That flicker is not anxiety to be managed away. It's discernment, trying to get past all the reasons you've built for moving forward anyway. Before the sun rises on the third day, I want you to ask yourself one specific question, out loud if you can manage it, even just in a whisper. Ask, if I had all the information right now, right this second, would I still make this same choice, with the same confidence I've been performing for everyone around me? Sit in the silence, after you ask it. Don't rush to fill that silence, with the answer you've already prepared. Let the real answer surface on its own time, even if it takes longer than feels comfortable. There is also something I want to warn you about directly, because I don't believe in vague warnings that leave you more anxious, without giving you anything useful to act on. Watch for pressure, in these next 3 days. Watch for someone pushing you to decide faster than you're ready to, using language that makes hesitation sound like weakness or ingratitude. Real opportunities from me rarely require that kind of pressure to move forward. When something is actually aligned with what I have for you, it tends to hold steady, even when you take the time to be sure. It's the things that aren't aligned, that usually can't survive a little patience. I want to give you a practical way to hold this window, because vague spiritual instruction without something concrete to do, can leave you more anxious, not less. Each morning over these next 3 days, before you check your phone, before the noise of the day gets its hooks into you, I want you to sit in silence for a few minutes, and simply ask me one question: is there anything I need to see today, that I haven't seen yet? Then, listen. Not for a dramatic voice, or an obvious sign, but for the quiet nudge, the sudden memory that surfaces out of nowhere, the small detail that catches your attention differently than it would have yesterday. That's how I most often speak, not in thunder, but in the small shift of attention that redirects you toward what matters. I also want you to pay attention to your dreams, during these 3 nights specifically. I know you don't always remember them, and that's alright. But if you wake up with a fragment, even a strange, or seemingly unrelated one, write it down before it fades. Sometimes I speak most clearly in the language of pictures and symbols, when your conscious mind is too busy defending its decision, to listen while you're awake. Watch, too, for a repeated pattern in these 3 days, something that shows up more than once in slightly different forms, almost like I'm underlining a point I don't want you to miss. It might be a specific number, a specific phrase spoken by more than one unrelated person, a specific image that keeps crossing your path, in ways too consistent to easily dismiss as coincidence. When something repeats like that, treat it as emphasis, not accident. I also want to address what happens if, by the end of these 3 days, nothing dramatic has surfaced at all. No striking dream, no obvious sign, no piece of information that changes everything. Silence itself is information too. If you've genuinely sat in stillness, asked the honest questions, resisted the urge to rush past the discomfort, and the decision still feels settled and clear at the end of it, that clarity earned through patience is worth far more than a decision made in the heat of unexamined urgency. I am not always loud. Sometimes my clearest answer is simply the steadiness that remains, after everything false has had the chance to fall away. If any part of this is already landing somewhere familiar, if you already know exactly which decision I'm talking about, exactly which conversation created the pressure, exactly which person has been pushing you toward the deadline, type 911 right now. Let that number mark this moment, as the point where you stopped moving on autopilot, and started actually paying attention to what I've been trying to show you. Now, I need to speak to something deeper than just this one decision, because if I only address the surface, you'll walk straight into a similar situation again in 6 months, and I don't want to keep sending you the same warning on repeat for the rest of your life. There is a pattern I need to correct in you, gently, but honestly, because I love you too much to let it continue unaddressed. You have a habit of mistaking urgency for direction. When something feels pressing, When your chest tightens with the need to resolve it immediately, you interpret that pressure as a sign that this must be the right move, simply because the discomfort of not deciding has become unbearable. Urgency is not the same as my leading. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is refuse to be rushed by a feeling that mistakes speed for certainty. I also need to correct the way you've been treating other people's confidence as a substitute for your own clarity. Someone in your life speaks about this decision with total certainty, and their certainty has started to feel like it should be contagious, like if they're that sure, you should be too. But their certainty is not evidence. It's simply their perspective, filtered through their own history, their own fears, their own version of what they think is best for you, which is not always the same as what actually is best for you. I did not design you to borrow other people's conviction as a replacement for your own discernment. There's another pattern underneath this one, quieter and harder to admit. You have started to associate waiting with failure. Somewhere along the way, you began believing that a person who moves quickly, decides quickly, commits quickly, is somehow more capable, more decisive, more worthy of respect than someone who takes their time. I need to correct that belief completely. Discernment is not indecision. Taking the time to be sure is not weakness dressed up in patience. Some of the worst decisions in human history were made by people moving with total confidence and zero hesitation. Some of the wisest decisions were made by people willing to sit in uncertainty a little longer than felt comfortable, because they valued being right over being fast. I want to correct one more thing before we move forward, and this one is the hardest to hear, so I'm going to say it as gently and as clearly as I can. Part of the reason you're rushing this decision is because you're afraid that if you wait, the option will disappear, and you'll be left with nothing, the same way certain other things have disappeared from your life before, without warning. That fear is understandable, given everything you've survived. But I don't want you making decisions out of scarcity, grabbing at whatever's in front of you, because you're terrified nothing better will come if this one slips away. I have never once run out of good things to offer you. Scarcity is not how I operate, even when your circumstances have made it feel that way, for longer than you can remember. Let me trace this pattern back a little further, because I don't think it started with this decision. Somewhere earlier in your life, you learned that good things move quickly, and disappear if you hesitate. Maybe it was an opportunity you watched someone else seize while you were still deciding. Maybe it was a relationship that ended, because you took too long to say what you actually felt. Whatever the origin, that early lesson has been quietly running your decision-making ever since, whispering that hesitation always costs you something, that the safest move is always the fastest one. I need to correct that lesson tonight, because it was never fully true, and it has cost you more peace than it has ever saved you time. There is a difference between the discipline of moving when I clearly say move, and the anxiety of moving simply because standing still has become unbearable. I want you to learn to recognize the difference in your own body, in your own spirit, because this will not be the last time in your life you face a decision under pressure. The skill I'm building in you tonight is not just about this one choice. It's about training you to recognize my voice reliably enough that you don't need an external warning like this one every single time. I also want to gently address the comparison you've been making, quietly, between yourself and people who seem to move through life with total decisiveness, never second-guessing, never circling back to reconsider. Some of what you're seeing in them is not actually confidence. Some of it is simply a lack of the depth you carry, the same depth that makes you careful, thoughtful, and unwilling to move recklessly through decisions that will shape years of your life. I did not make you slower because you're weaker. I made you thorough because I trusted you with things that require thoroughness. There is one final layer of correction I want to offer, and it concerns how you've been treating this warning itself. Some part of you, hearing all of this, might already be preparing to explain away what doesn't fit comfortably into the decision you still want to make. That instinct, the reflex to argue with a warning before you've even finished receiving it, is worth noticing honestly. I'm not asking you to abandon your own judgment and simply obey blindly. I'm asking you to actually sit with what I've said tonight, instead of immediately building a case against it. There is a difference between disagreement that comes after careful consideration, and dismissal that happens before the consideration has even begun. I want you engaging with this warning the first way, not the second. I know it would be easier, in a sense, if I simply told you never to make big decisions quickly, if I gave you a rule you could apply the same way every single time, regardless of circumstance. But that's not how I actually work with you, and I don't want to pretend it is, just to make this message tidier. There will be other moments in your life, where speed is exactly what's called for. Where hesitation would cost you more than moving would, where I'm asking you to step forward with courage, rather than pause with caution. Tonight is not one of those moments. I need you to trust that I know the difference, even when explaining every detail of why, would take longer than either of us has time for, right now. There's a name that came to your mind, while I was describing that late-night sigh, that quiet question you haven't fully asked yourself yet. Maybe it's someone standing at their own crossroads right now, rushing toward a decision, out of the exact same exhaustion and fear you've been carrying. Send this to them. You'll know exactly why their face appeared, the moment I mentioned it, and they may need this pause, as urgently as you do tonight. I want to close by telling you what's actually on the other side of this pause, because I don't want you thinking that waiting means missing out. That patience is just a polite word for losing your chance. When you actually wait, when you let this decision breathe, instead of forcing it closed in the next 3 days simply to relieve the discomfort of not knowing, something happens that rushing could never produce. You get to see the decision clearly, without the fog of urgency, distorting what you're actually looking at. Options that seemed identical from a distance, start to separate from each other, revealing details you couldn't have caught, while moving at the speed fear was demanding of you. I also want you to understand that if this decision is actually right for you, if it's genuinely part of what I have planned for your life, waiting will not destroy it. What's truly meant for you does not have an expiration date measured in 72 hours. It will still be standing, solid and unchanged, on the other side of your patience. The only things that can't survive a pause are the things that were relying on your rush to slip past your discernment in the first place. Let me describe this a little further, because I want the image to stay with you long after you've finished hearing this. Imagine standing at a fork in a road at dusk, the light fading fast enough that both paths look almost the same shade of gray. If you rush forward in that light, you're choosing based on guesswork, dressed up as instinct. But if you simply wait a little longer, even just long enough for a bit more light to arrive, the two paths reveal themselves as clearly different, one solid, and one crumbling at the edges in ways you couldn't have seen in the dimness. I am the light you're waiting for. Not an obstacle keeping you from moving. The very thing that will let you see clearly enough to move well. I also want to speak to what happens in you personally, during a season of genuine waiting. Because I don't want you to think of these 3 days as empty, wasted time simply because you're not actively doing something toward the decision. Waiting, done rightly, is not passive. It is some of the most active spiritual work a person can engage in, because it requires you to sit with discomfort instead of numbing it, to ask hard questions instead of avoiding them, to trust me with an outcome, instead of forcing one into existence through sheer will. That kind of waiting builds something in you that rushing never could. It builds the capacity to trust me, even when trusting me is inconvenient, even when everyone around you is moving at a different pace than the one I'm asking of you. I want you to think, too, about every other time in your life you were asked to wait, and later understood exactly why. There have been seasons before this one, where the delay felt unbearable in the moment. Where you couldn't understand why the door wasn't opening on your preferred timeline, and only much later did the reason become obvious, sometimes even something you were grateful for, once you finally saw the fuller picture. This is not different from those seasons, even though it feels different right now, standing this close to it. The pattern of my faithfulness in your past is not separate from what I'm asking of you tonight. It's the evidence you already have. If you're willing to remember it honestly, instead of treating this moment as though it exists in isolation from everything I've already proven to you before. Picture the version of you standing on the other side of this decision, 6 months from now, a year from now. In one version, you rushed, and you're living with the slow unraveling of consequences you didn't see coming, because you refused to let this warning slow you down. In the other version, you waited. You let the missing pieces surface, you asked the honest questions instead of the comfortable ones, and you're standing in a place of genuine peace, whether that peace came from moving forward with full clarity, or from choosing not to move forward at all. I am asking you to choose the second version tonight, even though it costs you something in the short term. Even though waiting feels harder right now than simply getting the deciding over with. I know part of you wants me to just tell you the answer outright, to remove the discomfort of discernment entirely, and hand you a clear yes or no you can act on immediately. I understand that desire completely. But I did not bring you this far to make you dependent on constant instruction for every decision you'll ever face. I brought you this far to sharpen your ability to hear me clearly, to trust the flicker of doubt instead of talking over it. To recognize the difference between urgency and direction on your own, so that the next time a decision like this arrives, you won't need a warning delivered to you from the outside. You'll already know how to wait. I want to say one more thing before you go, something I don't think you've let yourself fully consider yet. Even if, after these 3 days, after the questions and the silence and the honest looking, you still arrive at the same decision you were originally planning to make, that is not a failure of this process. Sometimes the answer on the other side of genuine discernment is the same answer you started with, but arrived at with clarity instead of pressure, with peace instead of fear. If that's where you land, you'll land there differently than you would have tonight, rushing forward without ever having asked the questions at all. Either way, you will not be the same person making the decision on day 3 that you are right now, and that difference matters more than you currently realize. Let the next 3 days be different than you originally planned. Let them be slower, quieter, more honest than the version you were about to rush through. Ask the questions you've been avoiding. Notice the pressure, and name it out loud, instead of letting it push you forward silently. Watch for what surfaces. And trust it when it does. Wherever you land at the end of this window, land there with your eyes open, not with your eyes closed against everything that made you hesitate in the first place. That is all I have ever asked of you in moments like this. Not perfect certainty. Just honesty, sustained long enough for the truth to surface on its own. You did not click on this message by accident. I pulled you here on purpose, in exactly enough time to still matter. Use it well. I am not finished showing you what's true. I am simply asking you, one more time, before you take that next step, wait, and let me finish speaking first. 3 days. That's all I'm asking for tonight. Not forever. Not a lifetime of second-guessing every choice you make. Just 3 days, held with open hands instead of a clenched fist, and I promise you, by the end of them, you will know exactly what to do next.